Welcome to Tech Disruptions, deep dives into the technologies reshaping industries, from AI to quantum to biotech. Let's get into it.
Okay, so did you see Google's latest security announcement? Because it felt less like an announcement and more like a five-alarm fire drill.
You mean the one where they just unilaterally chopped 4 to 6 years off the global consensus for post-quantum cryptography migration? Yeah, that one sent shivers down my spine.
Shivers down your spine is putting it mildly. They basically just told the entire internet infrastructure you have 3 years to completely rebuild your cryptographic backbone or you're toast.
It's not just a warning, it's an acceleration. When Google's Heather Adkins and Sophie Schmieg say they're moving their internal deadline to the end of 2029, they're not just moving their deadline, they're moving everyone's deadline.
Exactly. For years, we've been hearing about Q-Day, this theoretical moment when quantum computers are powerful enough to shatter all our current encryption. And the general industry consensus, the NSA, Microsoft, NIST, they're all aiming for 2033, maybe even 2035.
Yeah, and those timelines already felt aggressive for something so foundational. I mean, migrating global cryptography historically takes a decade, sometimes 15 years. But Google just came in like, nope, 3 years, get it done.
It's a massive alarm bell. What I want to know is, are they trying to save the internet from some secret Chinese quantum breakthrough they've detected? Or is this the ultimate corporate power play to sell more PQC-ready Google Cloud contracts?
It's probably both, honestly, but the sheer audacity of it, the impact on the entire supply chain, it's unprecedented. They're basically forcing the world to react.
So let's clarify something right out of the gate, because I think this is a common misconception. When Google says 2029, they're not saying Q-Day, the actual day a cryptographically relevant quantum computer will exist, is happening in 2029, right?
No, absolutely not. That's a critical distinction. Q-Day is the hypothetical moment a CRQ, a machine powerful enough to run Shor's algorithm and break public key crypto, actually gets turned on. What Google is doing is setting a migration deadline. They're saying we need to be fully migrated to post-quantum cryptography by 2029, before that threat materializes.
So it's about building the shield before the weapon is fully forged.
Precisely. If you wait until the weapon is built to start building your shield, you've already lost. The window of safety is shrinking much faster than anyone anticipated.
But still, 2029, that's 4 years ahead of the NSA's National Security Systems target of 2033, and a full 6 years before NIST in the UK's NCSC wanted to deprecate legacy encryption by 2035. What did Google see that spooked them this badly?
Well, it wasn't a single event. It's a confluence of factors, but one really stands out.
Lay it on me.
For years, the comforting assumption was that breaking something like 2048-bit RSA encryption would require a perfect, error-free quantum computer with a billion physical qubits. And qubits are notoriously fragile, prone to heat, radiation, you name it. A billion perfect qubits seemed decades away, if not further.
Right, so we all had this mental picture of needing this perfectly pristine, super-cooled, isolated quantum supercomputer, and that was just science fiction for the foreseeable future.
Exactly. Then the math changed. A previous estimate said it would take 20 million qubits to factor RSA 24.8 in about 8 hours. Still a huge number, but a step down.
Okay, 20 million is a lot less than a billion, but still feels far away.
Hold on to your hat. A revised paper, thanks to better algorithms and advanced error correction, proved that a quantum computer could break RSA 24.8 in less than a week using less than 1 million noisy qubits.
Wait, really? A million noisy qubits? That's a 20-fold decrease in the resources required.
It is. The barrier to entry just plummeted. Threat actors no longer need to build a perfect quantum computer. They just need a good enough, noisy one. This is the equivalent of suddenly realizing you don't need a super advanced laser to cut through a diamond. A slightly less powerful one will do the job in a fraction of the time.
That's wild. That completely upends the timeline everybody was working with.
And hardware is catching up to the math. In December 2024, Google unveiled their Willow chip. It's a 105-qubit processor, but here's the key. It demonstrated below-threshold error correction for the first time. This means that adding more qubits to the system actually reduces errors rather than compounding them. That was a massive hurdle.
So the theory is proving out in practice, and the goalposts for breaking encryption just got a lot closer. You mentioned the geopolitical angle earlier. Is there something specific driving that?
There absolutely is. The source material highlights that there's an unspoken geopolitical reality here. According to reports, U.S. tech policymakers are growing increasingly anxious about breakthroughs in rival international labs. Over the past 2 years, Chinese scientists in particular have reportedly made significant leaps across several fields of quantum computing.
So it's almost like a new kind of arms race. The Cold War space race, but for quantum supremacy.
Exactly, or the Manhattan Project. The U.S. government and American tech giants are terrified of a Sputnik moment, where a foreign adversary quietly reaches Q-Day first. Imagine if China or Russia achieves a cryptographically relevant quantum computer before the U.S. financial system or national security systems are migrated to PQC. It would be a catastrophic national security failure.
So if Q-Day isn't until the 2030s, and Google's just setting a migration deadline, why this frantic rush? Why does it matter now?
Because of something called HNDL, Harvest Now, Decrypt Later. It's the most chilling acronym in cybersecurity, and it makes quantum risk a present-day problem, not a future one.
HNDL. Sounds ominous. Break it down for me.
It's a terrifyingly simple attack strategy, often executed by nation-state actors. It operates in 3 phases.
Okay, paint the picture.
Phase 1, Harvest. Attackers quietly intercept encrypted network traffic. They exploit endpoints, breach cloud servers. They collect massive amounts of data. Now, because this data is encrypted with current standards like RSA or ECC, they can't read it today. It's gibberish.
So they just sit on it.
Phase 2, Store. Storage is incredibly cheap. They archive this encrypted data in massive data centers, sometimes for decades. They wait.
And then phase 3.
Decrypt. Exactly. The moment a cryptographically relevant quantum computer comes online, they run Shor's algorithm against that archived data. It shatters the encryption, and suddenly, all that historical, previously unreadable data is laid bare.
So it's like a thief stealing a locked safe today, knowing they won't get the combination for another 10 years. If the contents of that safe are still valuable in 10 years, the theft is already a massive success.
Perfect analogy. That introduces the concept of data shelf life. Some data loses its value quickly, like a credit card number that expires in 3 years. But other data has a shelf life of decades. Think about classified government secrets, corporate intellectual property, R&D, proprietary AI algorithms, even healthcare records, biometric data, long-term financial strategies.
So if your data needs to remain secret for, say, 25 years, and a quantum computer is built in 10 years, then if that data is intercepted today, it's already compromised.
Precisely. This reframes quantum risk entirely. It's not a futuristic IT problem. It is an immediate data governance and legal compliance issue. Organizations that wait for quantum computers to actually exist before upgrading their defenses will find that the damage was already put in motion years ago. The clock for sensitive data isn't ticking from Q-Day. It's ticking from now.
Okay, so the threat is real and present, but it's easy for Google to say, migrate by 2029. Actually doing it sounds like a logistical nightmare that makes the Y2K bug look like patching a single Excel spreadsheet.
It really does. Historically, migrating global enterprise cryptography takes anywhere from 10 to 15 years. Think about the transition from the SHA-1 hash function to SHA-2. That was dubbed the SHA-pocalypse, and it took years of painful upgrades, caused massive outages, and exposed how deeply legacy systems were tied to old math. Google is demanding a transition infinitely more complex in a mere 3-year window, from 2026 to 2029.
And the first step of this migration isn't even swapping algorithms, it's finding them. This is what's called cryptographic discovery. You cannot secure what you cannot see. IT departments are discovering their environments are riddled with shadow certificate authorities spun up by rogue dev teams years ago. hard-coded keys permanently embedded in the firmware of legacy IoT devices or industrial control systems, and tons of third-party dependencies where software vendors haven't updated their own cryptography.
So it's not just upgrading the stuff you know about, it's uncovering decades of digital cruft that nobody's touched in forever. That's terrifying.
And then there's the actual implementation. The new algorithms rely on lattice-based cryptography, a complex mathematical approach that quantum computers struggle to solve.
So that's good news, right? We have the new algorithms.
We do, but there's a massive trade-off: key sizes. Lattice-based PQC keys and signatures are significantly larger than traditional RSA or ECC keys. This means more computational power, more bandwidth, and more memory are required. While a modern cloud server can handle this easily, imagine a legacy SAP system, a smart pacemaker, or a sensor on an oil rig. They might simply lack the hardware capacity to process PQC. Millions of devices will require physical hardware replacement, not just a software update.
So this isn't just a software patch. It's a complete rip and replace for a huge chunk of the world's connected devices.
Absolutely. And Google isn't just making recommendations. They're using their market dominance to force compliance. By baking PQC into the world's most popular browser and mobile OS, Google is effectively forcing downstream developers, app creators, and enterprise clients to adapt or break.
So if Google is strong-arming the entire tech industry, what does this mean for the private sector? And what about decentralized networks like Bitcoin?
The private sector is absolutely in panic mode. Unlike federal agencies, private businesses don't have a government mandate to switch to PQC. But they face immense pressure from tech giants like Google, Apple, and Microsoft. Smaller organizations are particularly vulnerable because they rely so heavily on third-party cloud platforms, VPN vendors, and software partners to handle their cryptography. If those don't upgrade, they're exposed.
And Bitcoin, is the world's most famous cryptocurrency in danger of being shattered by a quantum computer?
It's facing an existential crisis, yes. You have to separate Bitcoin's two cryptographic pillars to understand the threat.
Okay, tell me more.
First, there's hashing, like SHA-256, used for mining and proof of work. This is theoretically threatened by a quantum technique called Grover's algorithm. Fortunately, Grover's only provides a quadratic speedup, meaning we can secure the network simply by doubling the hash size. Hashing is relatively safe.
So the core mining aspect isn't the biggest threat.
No, the real danger is to signatures. Bitcoin uses ECDSA 256, the elliptic curve digital signature algorithm, to prove ownership of a wallet. This is highly vulnerable to Shor's algorithm. If a cryptographically relevant quantum computer comes online, an attacker could derive a user's private key from their public key and then steal their funds.
So all the money in all those wallets could just be gone?
Potentially. And this is where the timeline really bites. A quantum-resistant address type has been introduced. That's a huge step forward. But Bitcoin is a decentralized network that moves by consensus. It took years just to agree on minor block size upgrades. A full post-quantum migration for the Bitcoin network could take up to 7 years.
7 years, and Google just said we have 3.
Exactly. If Google is right and the migration window closes in 2029, Bitcoin is statistically behind schedule. Ethereum is arguably better positioned, but can a decentralized network survive a hard deadline imposed by the physics of quantum mechanics?
That's a terrifying question, because if a CRQC is turned on, legacy exposed addresses become massive, immovable targets for nation-state hackers.
It's a ticking time bomb for anyone with funds in older, unmigrated addresses.
So let's bring it back to Google. Is their 2029 deadline a genuine existential threat assessment based on classified breakthroughs in quantum labs? Or is it a strategic business flex, as you put it?
I think it's both. The math, especially the revised 1 million noisy qubits estimate, absolutely supports a compressed timeline. The threat is real, but it's also undeniably a strategic business move.
How so?
EXO, Google operates the world's most widely used browser, Chrome, and a dominant cloud infrastructure platform, Google Cloud. By declaring a 2029 deadline, Google positions itself as the ultimate quantum safe haven. They are telling Fortune 500 CISOs, the quantum apocalypse is coming in 3 years. Your legacy on-prem servers can't handle it. Move everything to Google Cloud, and we will handle the PQC migration for you.
It's the ultimate fusion of genuine cybersecurity leadership and aggressive enterprise sales. They're telling everyone to panic, but also saying, don't worry, we've got you covered for a fee.
Precisely. It's a very Google way of doing business.
So, Google's March 2026 announcement has completely changed the cybersecurity landscape. What are the key takeaways from all of this?
First, 2029 is a migration deadline, not a prediction of Q-Day. It's about locking the doors before the quantum burglar arrives.
And the big shift was realizing we don't need 1 billion perfect qubits to break RSA. 1 million noisy ones will do, drastically accelerating the threat timeline.
Which brings us to the HNDL threat model. If your data has a shelf life longer than the time it takes to build a quantum computer, it is already at risk today.
And the hardest part of this whole thing isn't the math. It's the cryptographic discovery, finding all the decades-old legacy cryptography buried in enterprise networks and IoT devices.
Finally, while centralized giants like Google can mandate upgrades, decentralized networks like Bitcoin face a monumental coordination challenge to migrate before the clock runs out. It's a race against physics, and consensus moves slowly.
That leaves us with some pretty big questions to ponder. I mean, will the US government follow Google's lead and push federal mandates from 2033 to 2030? That would be a huge shift.
And how many small to medium businesses will simply fail to migrate by 2029, creating a massive underclass of quantum vulnerable companies ripe for exploitation?
And the scariest one of all, if a nation-state secretly achieves a cryptographically relevant quantum computer, will they announce it to the world? Or will they silently drain Bitcoin wallets and decrypt state secrets in the dark?
That's the nightmare scenario. We may never know if Q-Day has happened until it's far too late.
That's all for this episode of Tech Disruptions. Join us next time as we keep exploring the technologies reshaping our world. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.
Stay curious out there.